This is Rally Around the Cannon, some thoughts on Princeton's history by somebody who should know better. It's February, and the young Princetonian's mind, overheated from first semester exams, turns to thoughts of bicker. Seemingly, it has been so forever. 250 or so of my classmates and I, about 30% of the class, chose not to bicker in 1968, and essentially we all assumed we were acting against an institution that had gone unassailed since the first Ivy Club building opened in 1883. Most felt the clubs and or the bicker process itself was too powerful, that the prevailing inter-club council solution of 100% bicker was inadequate, if not cold-bloodedly cruel, and that some type of, quote, viable social alternative, unquote, needed to be put in place. When the Goheen administration came through with two, the newly strengthened Wilson College and the new Stevenson Hall, we figured we had done the necessary and the campus could finally move on to more substantive worries like Vietnam and the single wing and co-ed week and Jimi Hendrix. So, we fast forward to May 2010 and find a big-name university task force triumphantly issuing a groundbreaking report on its exhaustive study of a crucial campus sore point, the eating clubs and bicker. Not only has the 42-year interim not served to settle those questions, but here at Nostalgia Central, it resurrects our old buddy Santayana, who chortles at us all yet again for forgetting the past and thus being doomed to repeat it. In fact, had we in 1968 paid a bit more attention to the ebb and flow of the street over the prior decades, instead of assuming we were coming up with anything fresh, we might have better understood what needed doing and what would need to be relentlessly followed up. Or maybe we would have become so fatalistic as to save our energy in the first place, who knows. I've come to regard the club versus university friction as the moral equivalent of kudzu. Ceaselessly climbing over everything, you brutally hack it back during the day and then it regains the territory while you sleep. For a 127-year-long debate, the points of contention are strikingly few and pithy, but they give new zest to the concept of intransigence. In no particular order, that changes frequently anyway, the gripes involve first, food, the supposed reason for all this hubbub. You do have to admit that the university's approach to gustatory glory has seen mixed results over the years. Second, student fees. Inefficient clubs have always cost more than university meals, good or bad. After decades of complaints about forcing clubsters who were on financial aid to pay the difference, the university now covers it, to a chorus of complaints for not covering social fees too. Third, facilities. Those rock piles on the street cost a lot to heat and repair, and some grad boards are richer than others. So clubs whose rosters wane can decrepitate or die with stunning rapidity, and they have. Or they raise student fees even more. Fourth, social life. If club events vanish, the university would have to creatively fill the resulting entertainment and interpersonal gaps. In 130 years, it has never had to, so it hasn't. Fifth, bicker, including the complicated feeder organizations, by the way. Who gets in? Who gets blackballed? Who's on your team? Who's in your frat? One club or multiple clubs? In the rooms or in the clubhouses or in the archway? Groups or singles, ties or ascots, tweeds or suits, Ginger or Mary Ann. Lord, please, please spare me. And last but not least, alcohol. The very first contract between Ivy and the college in 1883 that allowed the first permanent clubhouse banned alcohol from the premises. as the university, the country, and the great state of Snooky have subsequently bungled their way through multiple fashionable liquor policies, up to and including prohibition, the clubs are no longer dry, you think, but perpetually confused. Intriguingly, there are even significant potential issues that seem never to arise. Residential clubhouses, for example. Weirdly, the last to approach that may have been club nemesis Woodrow Wilson, who wanted to make them the centers of residential quads. Or on the opposite pole, banishment of the clubs. Despite a constant inability to transcend the old problems, almost everyone is amicably agreed to the clubs being kept on in a limited role. In either extreme, meaningful exchanges of whys and why nots seem to hover in some mystical fog. And with all deference to the current report, which has some very intelligent ideas, saving money on insurance for the clubs through the university, more flexible club meal plans, replacing Bicker wholesale, some sort of rapprochement with the admissions office. We really have been here before. Back in 1968, I now realize we had still been here before. Back in 1940, the Interclub Council itself, headed by its then president Bob Goheen of all people, proposed reforms, and we still had been here before. I think my favorite uprising, the first of any import that was entirely student-generated, was the Cleveland Revolt in 1917. Based on the idea that the clubs were operating, quote, against the best interests of the university, unquote, thus seemingly in sympathy with Wilson, only 7 years gone at that point. This attempt to keep members of the class of 1919 out of Bicker proposed as an alternative a university hall or student center adjacent to the new commons with extensive recreation facilities and eating areas for upperclassmen. The movement developed some instant heft, due in large part to its spokesman and guiding light, Richard F. Cleveland of the class of 19, who was the eldest son of the late ex-president and university trustee Grover Cleveland. By March, 100 of the class, almost 30%, does that number sound familiar? Almost 30% chose not to bicker. Incidentally, one of those was J. Douglas Brown of the class of 19, who went on to be the architect of the American Social Security system and the dean of Princeton's faculty for 21 years. President Hibben responded to the 1917 sophomore group's beseechings by doing nothing. Timing then, as in the later case of World War II obscuring the Goheen reforms, played a faithful role. World War I completely distracted and changed everything at Princeton for a couple years. Cleveland went off to the Marines, and afterward the roaring 20s were upon us and the anti-club sentiment was washed away in bathtub gin. Speaking of which, the 1917 boycott may even have had some residual effect on the ardent cottage man Scott Fitzgerald, whose electric prose in This Side of Paradise came to embody the zenith of the street in the 20s. Fitzgerald wrote in 1940, soon after the Goheen ICC reforms were announced and just prior to his death while reading your favorite periodical, of Fitzgerald's desire to abolish the, quote, ragged squabble of club elections with its scars of snobbishness and adolescent heartbreak. Imagine that. The creator of the jazz age picking Mary Ann over Ginger. Yours in virtual orange and black, this is Greg Lang of the great class of 1970. Rally Round the Cannon is a podcast from the Princeton Alumni Weekly online.